On the morning of September 16th, 2007, in Niagara Falls, Ontario, a group of 5 divers parked their cars in a small lot at the mouth of the Welland River, a small river that feeds into the mighty Niagara River, with Niagara Falls being located only about a mile and a half further downstream. The Welland River is a well-known local diving destination and is considered to be a beginner-friendly dive, as the river's gentle flow drifts divers along their route, and the river only reaches maximum depths of about 30 feet. Diving in the Welland River offers divers a chance to see the local fish, including huge sturgeon over 10 feet long, and most cite the greatest hazard to divers being the boat traffic above. The group of 5 had planned to set off from the mouth of the Welland River that morning, floating down the river for about an hour, and finally exiting the water at a nearby boat ramp about 2 kilometers downstream. There, another friend waited to pick the group up and bring them back to their cars afterwards. For 4 of the 5 divers, this would not be their first time diving this exact route, and so, at 8:30 a.m. on September 16th, 2007, the group entered the water and descended down about 15 feet and began to swim their way towards the middle of the channel. The water was murky that morning, with visibility being at about 5 feet. The group managed to make their way to the middle of the river, sticking together, although visibility in the water was so poor that one of them, the diver new to the dive, could not see the rest of the group at all, even when they were together. However, after swimming out to the middle of the channel together, the group of divers became separated. 2 of the divers proceeded along the planned route for the dive, but they found that the river's current was not pushing them along, and so they had to begin swimming their way up the Welland River instead. The diver, who had not done this drift dive before, soon found himself completely lost and separated from the others, and he felt himself drifting in strange currents. So, being unfamiliar with the area and with the poor visibility conditions, he decided to surface and see where he was. Upon surfacing, he found himself under the pedestrian bridge at the edge of the Niagara River, not far from where the group had set out from, and fearing that he'd be pushed out by the currents further and into the Niagara River, the man clung to one of the bridge's supports and called out for help. He was picked up by a nearby boat and brought back to shore. By this time, the first pair of divers that had proceeded down the route as planned became separated at a bridge a bit further down the Welland River. At this point, one of them surfaced, and having given up on the dive at this point, swam down to the boat ramp and exited the river. The other diver continued his dive solo, and after an exhausting nearly 2-hour dive, the diver exited the river 800 meters from the planned exit point at the boat ramp. And finally, the last 2 men of the group, Michael Ford and Perry Cleland, like the diver that had become separated from the rest of the group, headed out from the mouth of the Welland River and into the Niagara River. Ford and Cleland, unlike the other diver, however, had dived in that exact area before and likely knew that they had left the Welland River and entered the Niagara River instead. Despite this, the 2 men did not turn around, but rather continued their dive into the Niagara River. It was likely that this was entirely intentional, as the area was well known to local divers, and a few hundred meters downstream from where the Welland River meets the Niagara, there are 2 water intakes for a nearby hydroelectric dam, which could allegedly be explored when they were not in operation. The intakes were usually only in operation in the afternoons. Unfortunately for Michael Ford and Perry Cleland, however, the intakes were indeed in operation as they approached them, and the duo were helplessly sucked into the dam's water intake pipes, where they would ultimately drown. At around 9:30 a.m., the other 3 divers had realized that Cleland and Ford were completely unaccounted for, and they began to fear the worst. They called the authorities, and a search for the pair was soon initiated. However, as the duo had split far off course from the intended route of the dive that morning, police divers began to scour the riverbed of the Welland River, sending a diver to walk along the bottom, searching for any sign of the missing pair of divers, as a helicopter was also dispatched to search for any sign of them from above. The search continued on throughout the next week, but by September 19th, the divers had still found no trace of them. As the days wore on, the visibility within the Welland River had not improved and even worsened, and so police began to scan the bottom of the Welland River using sonar, hoping to find some trace of the missing duo that the police divers may have missed on their previous passes. But as they were searching in the wrong area, they never turned up any leads. On September 21st, at around 1 a.m., police received a call from the Sir Adam Beck hydroelectric power generating station, reporting that they had found the body of an adult wearing scuba gear near a water intake, and that upon lowering the water level to get a closer look, they found the body of a second man, also clad in scuba gear nearby. These bodies turned out to be Michael Ford and Perry Cleland. The location where their bodies were found was over 7 miles away from the water intake that the men had initially been drawn into. An investigation into the incident was launched, and officials found several factors that may have contributed to this disaster. Most notable of these findings was that on that day, Ontario Power Generation officials had altered the flow of the Welland River for the first time in over 30 years in order to inspect the hydro canal for the Sir Adam Beck hydroelectric dam, which is why the pair of divers that proceeded according to the plan found themselves swimming rather than simply drifting up the Welland River as usual. This unusual water flow event had been publicized locally, but it was unknown if this news had reached the divers, as several of them were not from the immediate area. Furthermore, investigations found, while that the area around these intakes and where the men had originally set off from had clearly been marked with signage stating no swimming, the area was well known to divers, and a charity diving group had conducted a large dive starting from that same point just a few weeks previously and were not stopped by authorities from doing so. Ontario Power Generation also further monitored the area around the water intakes with patrol boats, one of which had rescued the first-time diver from under the footbridge, but seeing as the other men were below the surface, the patrol boats had no hope of warning the pair of the imminent danger. The report found no exact cause for how the duo ended up drawn into the water intakes. However, as the pair knew the area well, it's unlikely that they did not notice that they'd left the Welland River and entered the Niagara River, and after entering the Niagara River, the pair would have had ample time to turn around and correct their mistake, so it seems likely that the men proceeded towards the water intakes intentionally. Ontario Power Generation was not found to be at fault for the incident, as the area in which the men were diving was clearly marked for no swimming, and was also patrolled by boats to further attempt to prevent people from entering the water. In wake of the incident, the Ontario Underwater Council made several suggestions to prevent further incidents of this nature in the future. They recommended that all divers stick to standard diving protocols, such as establishing a point of no return, sticking to the dive plan, and deploying a dive flag so that traffic above the divers could be aware of their location. They also recommended that signage around the area be altered to specify no diving, as divers do not typically associate themselves as swimmers, and thus were less likely to heed the warning signs addressed to swimmers. The area has since been outfitted with unmissable signage, including buoys, warning potential swimmers and divers of the dangers of entering the water near Kingsbridge Park. Thank you all for watching.